I'm caught in a whirlwind of emotions with Asra, and just when I think I've got him figured out, he goes and kisses me senseless, leaving me more confused than ever. 36. My feet barely touched the ground as Asra's large hand wrapped around my waist and lifted me into his side. With one arm, he carried me away from the table, and I stared wide-eyed at Piper the further he walked. She blinked once, twice, 3 times before her lips curled into a cunning grin. My hands gripped Asra's bicep tightly as he supported all of my weight in one arm. How could someone lift an entire human with one arm? Before I could even gauge my surroundings, we were back inside. The sudden lack of light had me snapping to my senses, and I increased my grip on Asra's hand. "What are you doing?" I gasped. "Put me down." He grunted and ignored my order. As always, no. Carrying me down the hall, we turned towards a large wooden door. He pressed his thumb into a strange device beside the doorframe, causing it to click and, I'm assuming, unlock. With his spare hand, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. He placed me on my feet, and I openly complained the profanity in his direction. No sooner did I get a glimpse of the large wooden table, when I was suddenly surrounded by his scent. I blinked away from the shiny computer to find myself entrapped by Asra's dark blue eyes. Swallowing the next complaint down, I took a few steps back to gain some distance. He followed every 2 of my own steps with one of his until my back hit something solid and my hands darted out to steady me. Glancing away quickly, I found I clasped my fingers around the side of an upholstered chair. I think you've called these moon chairs. Frowning, I lifted my gaze back to find Asra was still directly in front of me. His toes touched my own, his chest almost brushing mine. It was heaving as he took large lungs of air, but it was his eyes, so intense and daunting. I dreaded to think what was going on in that mind of his. But damn it, he couldn't just handle me like a bag of shopping. "Why the fuck did you carry me in here?" I snapped. He blinked harshly, his head recoiling at the change. As if realising his stoic stance, he took one step back and shook his head. Running a hand across his chin, he scrutinized me once more. He was infuriating, full of arrogance and bravado, and way too handsome for his own good. "Oh, what?" I huffed. "Why are you not afraid of me?" I blinked, dumbfounded. "What? How is that anything related to what I just asked you? Is your brain turned on?" "Alpha." His eyes narrowed. "Very much so." As on my eyes. I cockeyed tilted my head, crossing my arms along my chest. Pouting, I ran my eyes along his jean platform before clicking my tongue. "I'm glad your eyes are working, but I think you should get your ears tested." "Alpha?" He growled lowly. "Calling me Alpha will not give you the effect you desire." I paused, noticing how his eyes lit up as he spoke. Damn it, he was enjoying it. I hoped it irritated him. Being called it in such a way was meant to be degrading. "What do you want?" "Anyway," I sighed, flexing my fingers against my ribs. His eyes noted the movement, that intense furrow of his eyebrows returning. He took that single step closer once more, his earthy scent reminding me of fresh rain. This man was wild, in and out. His hand suddenly raised, and I automatically flinched, recoiling my head away from his outstretched palm. His frown deepened, but he didn't move closer until my eyes shyly met his. I waited with bated breath as he inched his hand closer. Slower this time. I barely reacted, frozen to the core, when his thumb tugged on my lower lip. My tongue darted out instinctively to wet my lips and pull my pout back in. I tasted the tip of his finger, causing his breath to hitch as the rest of his hand moved to rest on my jaw. I looked up at him through my lashes. unable to comprehend another word as the buzzing warmth of his skin flittered against mine. Once his hand was situated firmly on my jaw, my eyes fluttered closed and inhaled deeply as that strange warmth shot down my spine. My stomach flipped, an electrifying warmth filling my chest, my ribs hurting as they expanded with every breath. Asra, I sighed. His lower two fingers tightened on my throat, a deep rumble starting in his chest. I opened my eyes, eager to find out what was going on, but my throat dried with the intensity of his stare. His face was inches away, his breath fanning my forehead. A gentle push had my head tilting under his command, and the rumble in his chest returned at the movement. His name was a whisper breathed across my lips, my eyes searching his for answers. Those eyes held stories, held secrets of intense feelings and thoughts that he would never set free. His breath fanned my lips, the pooling warmth in my body filling me until it felt like I couldn't breathe. And it was then, and only then, that his lips caressed mine with secrets I could only wish to unlock. It was a gentle caress, as if testing my reaction to his bold movement. But I was too far gone, too lost in the sensations to even think straight. He came back for more, a firmer brush of his lips as though testing me again. I sighed into his touch, and tilted my head to allow our lips to meet just right. A blossoming bolt of pleasure racked my spine, my stomach doing somersaults as his lips molded against mine. He moved, tilting his head to deepen the kiss. His other hand came to rest on my waist, pulling me closer to him as his mouth hungrily devoured mine. A small hum of delight left me as my chest pressed against his, my hands reaching out to grab at anything I could. I found myself holding onto his bicep and waist. The feel of his muscle beneath my hands had my core clenching in a small moan to leave my lips. He growled in response before his lips moved and his teeth came to nibble at my lower lip. My moaning increased, giving him the opportunity to smother my lips and delve his tongue into my mouth. Everything around me blurred. The only thing my mind even registered was his body and mouth upon mine. As everything turned to nothingness, I shuddered. Wild tremors raking my spine caused my chest to heave with exertion. I never thought I could ever feel such a way. My body came alive as though someone had turned a switch on, like a match to flame. Every sensation, every nerve within me buzzed with energy. An impossible dream brought to light. And my heels. I didn't have to strain so far. But even so, I felt my back curve into his chest as his hand pulled me near. I felt needy and hot, my hands unable to grab enough of him as I fought against the current of waves crashing over me. Wrestling between pleasure and pain, I tilted my head away to catch my breath. He didn't stop there. His hand on my neck pulling me gently by some wisps of hair to expose the right side of my throat to him. His lips trailed down my jaw and sucked at the skin below my ear. I moaned, panting for breath as I unconsciously ground my front into him. I felt hot and needy, wanting to feel his skin against mine so desperately. Asra, I whimpered. He growled, his teeth nipping my skin. I gasped, my heart racing harder when his canines traced my throat. I felt myself sobering up, my fear of his teeth clouding my lust. My hands tightened on his body, my eyes opening as I searched for his face. Tufts of his hair filled my vision, and I removed the hand on his waist to grasp the strands. I gently tugged, swallowing harshly as the tip of his tooth pressed too harshly on my skin. I whimpered, unable to tell if he had broken skin or not. It was enough to break him out of the spell and push his head away from my throat. My worried eyes met his, and it startled me to find them completely black. His eyebrows furrowed, shrouding his dark iris with shadows. He was breathing harshly, his lips perfectly swollen and moist. But beneath those beautiful lips were the sharp glints of white wolf teeth. I cringed and dropped my gaze to my feet. causing him to release my body instantly. "I'm sorry," I whispered. I heard his teeth smash together, a deep rumble of what sounded like displeasure filling the small room. After a few tense moments of neither of us moving away to catch our breath, I finally rose my eyes to seek his face. He was staring down at me. His eyes had lightened to a deep blue, but his lips were marred with a frown. I was just thankful his canines had disappeared back into their rightful place. I should have shrouded away, convulsed with the intense look he was giving me, but I didn't feel the slightest bit affected. I have come to think that Asra was always this intense, always this moody. Unreadable, I don't know what. I began, but trailed off when my words disappeared with my thoughts. I noticed the slight twitch of his lips, a faint ghost of a smirk pulling his cheek just so. I stared at him, mouth partly agape, as I thought about what I wanted to say. Why did you kiss me? Probably not my best angle. Perhaps I was still too dazed. His hands clenched at his sides as a small scoff left his lips. You kissed me back. My nose crinkled as I frowned. That is not an answer. His tongue darted out to wet his lips, and I followed the motion as he then ran it along his upper teeth. My mouth was just there only a moment ago. Mine, nobody else's. I wondered what that tongue could really do. I shivered, looking away from his tantalizing mouth and back to his eyes. He wasn't hiding his amusement now. His eyes crinkled with a slight hint of warmth. I wouldn't have detected it if I weren't still so close to him. Perhaps it was just a way for me to shut that mouth of yours. Tulip. His voice was raspy and hoarse, a thrill shooting down my spine as it caressed my ears. Closing my eyes for a moment to catch my bearings, I shook my head in response. You dragged me here. Carried you. I carried you here? My eyes flew open, shooting him a glare. Unwillingly, he smirked, his hand coming to cut my jaw again, but this time I went to move away. His gaze narrowed, to fingers cupping my chin to pull my head closer to him. He bent at the shoulder, moving down until he was a hair width away. His breath ran along my nose and cheeks, warming my skin as I fought the urge to submit beneath his hold. He must have noticed the slight switch of my temper because he moved his hand to press his palm only against my cheek. His eyes searched mine before trailing along my face, his thumb catching my lower lip to give it a slight tug. I squirmed, unable to recognize the strange emotion within me. I exhaled shakily, running my tongue along my lips, in turn brushing it against his skin. His jaw clenched. The ghost of our touch only moments ago was still fresh on both of our minds. He was intoxicating and distant, and I ached to feel that suffocating inebriation one more time. You infuriate me, he murmured, his lips brushing my own. And it intrigues me. 37. I paused, my eyebrows furrowing as I stared up at the man that only a couple of weeks ago said I was a thorn in his side. You confuse me. Asra smirked. Do I? Very much. I nodded, my head shifting in his hand. He cocked his head to the side, blue eyes staring into my own as he seemed to search for something. He hummed low as he took a step back, his hand sliding from my face. I felt cool without him, like his touch was the only thing keeping me warm. I shuddered at the strange feeling, crossing my arms as though it would help. It seems we both have our own opinions, he murmured. I shrugged. Perhaps, except I am not sure what is going on. Why did you bring me here? He sighed, running a hand over his jaw. You're not giving up on that question, are you? Defiantly? I shook my head. I deserve an answer to why you handled me like a sack of potatoes. Potatoes would have put up less of a fight. I scoffed, trying to hide my slight amusement at his attempted tease. Not an answer. My eyes met his, his eyebrows tightly knit together as he stared at me. He remained stoic, however, keeping his gaze on me. It was a stalemate that neither of us was going to give up, and we both knew it. Sucking on my tongue, I hid my desire to look away, staying calm and collected under his gaze. Eventually, he was the one to blink and look away, running a hand through his hair. I tried to hide my smugness of winning the stare off, but kept it cool by switching my dominant leaning leg. Your dress. What about my dress? I questioned, tilting my head to stare down at myself. Not like the color. He growled lowly, agitated. You know, that's not why. I don't think I do. I shook my head. His eyes narrowed, jaw tensing as he glared at me. Okay, fine. You want me to say it. Say what? I batted my lashes, grumbling. He took a step closer. Your dress is too short, too tight, and too seductive. There are a lot of unmated males in my pack who should not be fucking you. I inhaled sharply. That is not my problem. If they cannot keep their eyes to themselves. He closed the gap once more, his hands grabbing my body and pulling me flush to his front. What you cannot see, Tulip, is how fucking incredible you look. I don't want a single other male looking at you like this. He breathed. Oh God. Not the pet name. I shivered, my lips parting. What if I want them too? I dared, adrenaline coursing through me. He growled, lips curling at threat. Then I will drag you here every time and spank you so hard you cannot walk back to your room. My body hummed with excitement, a strange thrill that had my toes curling. I pictured the brief image of what he was implying. His large, rough hands grabbing me in all the right places. Tulip, I only imagine what is going on inside your head right now. He groaned. So please, either finish this conversation or drop that pretty little dress of yours and bend over. I shivered, my shoulders shaking as the 𝐾𝐞𝐲 strode on my skin. My tongue felt heavy, mouth dry, and unable to comprehend what he was implying. I shrieked when his hands tensed on my waist, fingers digging into my skin. What's it going to be? Tulip. I stared open-mouthed at him, at a crossroads with my body. One part of me wanted to succumb to the strange magical feeling within me, to push him and see how far he would go. But another part of me wanted to run away. 𝐿𝐻. You can't do this. You can't let him win. It's just a game to him. A game, remember. The kiss. A game. The words. A game. A thorn in my side. He had said, nothing but his pack's benefit. Inhaling deeply, I slowly backed out of his grip. He let me go, the slight smirk on his face dropping along with his hands. I cleared my throat, avoiding looking at him straight on. I don't know what's going on, but you've made it very clear to me I am nothing of importance and that this is just a ploy to get me confused. I explained. I am sure you have many hordes of women waiting to take you up on that offer. So if you shall excuse me, I'm going to go. My name may be 𝐿𝐻, but I was not falling for it. He can go give another girl whiplash. Ignoring that part within me that wanted to turn around and fall into his embrace, I pivoted and walked towards his door. My hand met the cool of the door handle just as his voice broke the silence. Are you rejecting me? He whispered. I paused, halfway to turning the door handle. I don't know what that means, but I am not leaving this pack. So yeah. I met his eyes from over my shoulder. A half-assed apology smile sent his direction. My jaw clenched when I saw the slightest twitch of a frown on his face. Not waiting around anymore to fall victim to his games, I quickly hurried out of the door as soon as it was wide enough for me to squeeze through. Walking briskly down the hallway, I made my way to my room. I didn't want to go there. The weather was too sunny, too nice for a spring day to go to waste because of one stupid man. I had lunch, I spoke with my friends. Now what? Getting dragged away like a child was sure to boost my pack street cred not. Sighing, I slumped against my closed bedroom door. Staring out at the sunny weather, I longed to go outside. Thinking deeply, I thought about what I could do. I could go for a walk. Hope that I can be alone. Wait, I can go swimming. Squealing to myself, I clapped my hands and quickly shimmied out of the damn dress. Pulling my underwear off, I sought the bikini I wore last time. Its soft blue tie-dye inviting. Once I tied the multiple straps around my waist, I smoothed out the skirted bottom before pulling on an oversized t-shirt. I was 90% sure it was Asra's, but it was large enough to hit my mid-thigh, adorning my feet in some sliders. I grabbed a towel, only to be reminded of my lack of sun cream. Groaning, I knew I would have to grow some lady balls and go into the small shopping plaza. Grabbing a skirt, I tucked in most of the enormous shirt to be more decent in town. Leaving my room and entering the escalator, I arrived on the lower floor without being interrupted. I also made it out of the front door and down the track to the village with the sun beating down on my back. Nearer to the shops, there were multiple people lingering around. The smell of bread hitting my nose as I walked past the bakery, seeking the drugstore from last time. The door automatically opened for me and I stepped into the cool building, shivering at the sudden temperature change. I remembered what 𝐿𝐳 told me and searched for the sun cream. Grabbing to that worked like a spray bottle. I took them tentatively to the counter. The same guy from before was serving, and with a small smile, I placed the 2 bottles on the counter. He scanned them before giving me a lazy grin. Alpha's tab, licking my lips nervously. I nodded. Please. Of course. He bowed once, bagging my items. Say, you have to be someone special for the Alpha to pay for your things without protest. He wouldn't even do that for his brother. He is a brother. I hid my surprise at the mention of a sibling and thanked the guy instead. Giving him a quick goodbye, I grabbed my free purchase and left the store in a haste, thankful for my good sense of direction. I followed the familiar trail that would lead me to the woods. After a slow 10-minute walk in the shrouded trees, the smell of fresh water hit my nose just as the trickling of the waterfall brushed my ears. Grinning, I picked up my pace, running my hand along the 20-foot high wall until I finally rounded the corner of the waterfall. My face lit up at the sight of the welcoming water. Happy that I was alone. I was sure pack wolves didn't swim here often. The stories I had been told made the lake seem interesting to them. But after all, my father said I was a fish out of water. Placing my towel on one of the sunny spots through the trees, I stripped from my clothes and lathered the cream into my skin. You were supposed to wait a while before leaving the confines of shade, so I entertained myself by counting flowers and rocks until my patience wore thin, shoving another layer of cream on my skin as a last minute. Hope it will protect me, thought. I made my way to the waterfall. Scaling the rock, the sun beat down on my back as I grew higher. My hands grabbed the correct places, feet settling well in the rock as though nature made it for someone of my size. Reaching the top, I inhaled deeply, stretching my arms out wide as I embraced the freedom. I had no fear here. I was as free as a bird. Walking close to the edge, the water trickled past my ankles. It was gentle today, a soft current that guided me in my endeavor. My toes curled around the edge of the rock and I debated what kind of dive I was going to do. I could completely bomb it, or I could go elegant, deciding that I was nothing short of elegant. I launched myself into the air. The breeze whooshed past me as I pulled my knees to my chest and squeezed my eyes shut. The adrenaline thrill buzzed through me, my excitement flooding me just as hard as the water up my nose when I crashed the surface. Opening my eyes once I was under, I floated back up to the surface, gasping for breath. I wiped the hair from my face as I fell into spouts of laughter. Starfishing. I gazed up at the blue sky to catch my shaky breath. The lake was pure energy, a soft pulse against my skin as it rocked me gently in its current. We were one, the water and I, and if lakes had emotions, I was sure we would be the best of friends. I spent the next few hours at the lake, enjoying diving and swimming or just floating and contemplating the world. It was what I was doing now. As the sun moved more west, I found myself thinking of him. What was I supposed to do? Asra confused me. I think he truly did not know what he was doing or saying. It was one extreme to the next that had me seriously debating if the shifter race was capable of steady emotions. Was it all just a ploy? A game? Should I fall into his embrace and let him have his way with me? Would that get him off my back? To leave me alone like it did with Darius? Some part of me knew it wouldn't. The Asra was different. He was primal. Animal. He was possessive and demanding. He was quiet and observant. I didn't truly know the man. I knew nothing of his past, of his present, of his hopes and dreams for the future. He was an alpha, a stereotypical one too, full of boisterous demand for attention. He always captivated me. He was alluring and handsome. He was attentive and protective. I didn't understand the man at all, but these feelings inside of me, these raw, immature emotions, had me doubting everything I thought I knew. How could I be so attracted to someone like that? Someone so annoyingly frustrating and yet so godly attractive. I mean, easily, I guess. Who doesn't like a moody sex god in a romance novel? I had unconsciously drifted under the waterfall and the splatter of its current hit my face, as though snapping me out of my daze. Pulling myself upright, I shook the thoughts from my mind. I had to keep level, headed if I wanted to survive here. I had to find my meaning. 38. Guess what? Double update? Read 37 first gang. The next day, a pack meeting was called. I did not know, not being a wolf. So it surprised me when he burst into my room and dragged me away. She pulled me to the second row of the crowd filling the cafeteria-style kitchen. Luckily, I was dressed, having not been long since coming back from the lake and showering. Listen up, Asra bellowed. The murmuring of the crowd fell to a dead silence as everyone waited for their alpha to speak. Alpha Blake is coming tomorrow to go over our treaty alliance, he announced. Be aware of him and his men and try not to get in their way. I frowned, wondering who this alpha was. Asra stepped down and dismissed everyone, and as the buzzing murmurs of the crowd disappeared, I turned to Eve with questioning eyes. Her arm wrapped around my bicep and she shook her head before pulling me away. We walked back to my room, and I fell onto my bed, waiting for her to sit before asking my questions. Who is Alpha Blake? Why was it so important to Orton to have a meeting? I rushed. She groaned lightly, shaking her head. He's the 7th Alpha. Remember how Alpha Asra is the 6th? Well, this guy is the 7th. He is the worst. The worst. As in grinds your bones to dust. I squeaked. No, she snorted. He is overly confident. Despite being low down on the Continental Alpha list, he is arrogant and loud. But there are rumors that... She trailed off, frowning. Rumors, I urged. That he was part of the attack that killed the Luna. She murmured. My eyes widened. and I shook my head in disbelief. Hadn't she died during battle? She sighed, her head gazing out of the window. It's not a story that is told often. Please. I'd like to know more about the pack. I gave her my best puppy eyes. Eve grunted, giving in to my wishes. It was about 17 years ago. In human years, 𝐴𝐴 was around 16 and his father, 𝐴𝐴 was in charge. Wait, he's 33, I gasped. She laughed lightly. Wolves don't age like humans. They age about 5 times as slowly. That's... Well, okay. Slow aging. Got it? I shook my head in disbelief. Anyway, it was a normal afternoon. The pack was going by as normal. But then, just as the sun was about to go down, there was an ambush. Rogues broke the border and the patrol wolves were shot dead. She explained, her lips drooping into a frown. We were unprepared for battle. In usual circumstances of war, women and children rushed to the bunker beneath the pack house. But somehow, they knew. Someone who knew the land had led the rogues there, or at least tipped them off. The Luna fought all 15 of them off with the help of a few other female wolves. She died from her injuries once she got the women to safety. That's awful, I mumbled, fiddling with my comforter. She nodded, sighing softly. I was one child that she got to safety. But I barely remember it. The alpha wasn't the same since. For a wolf to lose a mate, it usually kills them. It crushes their soul, breaks their heart. A mate is a wolf's other half, the other part of their soul. So to lose that half, you lose yourself. My heart raced with sympathy as I breathed in sharply. I couldn't imagine losing someone so dear to you. I have had no one like that. My father, the only genuine person I really loved so intensely. Arabella may come a close second, but I barely knew her once they sent me to live with Darius. That's awful, I repeated. That's when he went hard with training. 𝐴𝐴 took over about 5 years later once he was ready. Her eyes narrowed. Where is his father now? I wondered. 𝐴𝐴 lives around here. He lost himself to his wolf after his mate died, and he took it out on 𝐴𝐴. She frowned. He lives in the forest, in a small lodge. Most of the time. He's in wolf form, unemotional and just running the perimeter. Quite a good guard wolf. Really? I snorted at her attempted joke, but I felt sorry for the man who seems to have lost it all. Pushing 𝐴𝐴 to take over with everything he had, cramming all the education into 5 years to make 𝐴𝐴 the leader he was today. And this 7th alpha, he is not to be trusted. She shrugged. The border breach was on his side. There is about a mile of no man's land between us before our borders meet on the east side. The breach was about half a mile from where we join. It was too close to his land that the pack has been suspicious ever since. So, it's just a rumor. Was it ever investigated? I wondered. No, they actually came to our aid. Some think it was a cover-up. Some think the rumors are just reaching for drama because they are sad about the loss of the Luna. Must have been a hard day. Hard 5 years. She frowned. 𝐴𝐴 and 𝐴𝐴 disappeared for most of the time. When they came back from training, he looked withered. He pushed his son to the brink of insanity. So much training in such a short time. We all saw how brutal it was. But once he was ready, we had the alpha ceremony, and it was like it never happened. I grimaced, wanting to change the topic. Didn't you say that was the day everyone went into the lake? She nodded. We went in to clear the blood and death away. It was apparently magical. Like the moon goddess herself washed every problem away. It made the loss of the Luna go down easier, and soothe the guilt most of all, but not the sorrow. Falling into a comfortable silence, I held the peace a little longer to think about how awful that must have been for Asra. I knew firsthand what it's like to lose a parent in cold blood. My heart ached for him, my opinion shifting a little to why he was perhaps the way he was. My father always taught me to speak my mind and not to take shit from anyone, something I tried my hardest to do once he passed. I wonder if Asra had a similar opinion. Block it all away and hope it stays away. As the sun went down, we made our way down to dinner. Most of the wolves had already left to turn for the night since it was nearing 8 o'clock. Grabbing a plate of leftovers, I almost bumped into one maid as she hurried about cleaning up discarded plates. Sitting at the table beside Eve, I watched her with a scowl. How Asra could employ someone to tidy up after wolves. They should do it themselves. They already get all their meals cooked for them. The least they can do is put their dishes away. Why are you staring at her like that? I snapped out of my attentive focus at the intruding voice. It surprised me to see Rio sat before Eve, his lard from hunched over a half-eaten plate of food. He glanced over his shoulder to eye the person serving. His lips pursed in a frown as he tried to see what my problem was. They worked hard, I stated, waving my fork as the maid disappeared. He turned back to me, a scoffing laugh escaping him. They are meant to work. They are who? He suddenly cut off his sentence, swallowing loudly as he eyed Eve. I noticed her shift her weight, her hand itching her temple as she no doubt sent him a look. They're humans, I finished curiously. Asra employs humans. Rio frowned, but nodded. He does. How much does he pay them? 2 coins a day. My eyes bugged out of my head. Is that it? He flinched, and I had the slightest remorse for taking it out on him. It was Asra I should demand things from. That is plenty for them to get a meal. Do you supply board and lodge? A roof over their heads. His silent frown was my answer, and I groaned in exasperation. So, 2 coins a day. Enough for a meal, as you said, but not enough to keep warm and dry. That is awful. You are awful for letting that happen. Do they ever get a pay rise? Things are getting more and more expensive as the months go by. Wolves up in costs of everything all the time. Eve nudged me, shaking her head. 𝐿𝐬? I grunted at her lack of enthusiasm. Where is Asra? Her lip twitched with annoyance at the title drop. As always. Rio interrupted, saving her neck. He's out of office. When is he back? I scoffed. He shrugged, and I groaned, sliding my chair back. I'm going to bed, not giving them another thought. I stomped my way out of the dining room, taking my dish into the kitchen. A sweet maid took it without looking up. It only enraged me further. The fact they taught her to not look at anyone. I would get them the justice they deserve. Perhaps that was my purpose. If Asra was my so-called mate, then surely I had some power in this. Maybe I could persuade him. I could make the world, the districts and villages better. This was it. I know what I had to do. I went to bed with a determination last night and woke up even more so. I got washed and dressed, ready for a day of ass-kicking. But to my disappointment, Asra wasn't anywhere. I tried his office and even asked if he was in his room, but none of the commoner wolves seemed to know where he was. I truly envied the wolves' ability to speak to each other in their minds. I went by breakfast on my own terms, having been up later than the normal crowd of wolves. By the time lunch came around, and still no sight of Asra, I decided I'd go back to the lake. I was jittery and wanted to burn off steam, so what better way to do that than swim in something that could easily kill me? I snorted. eyeing the cloudy day. It was still warm, though, so I pulled on a plain black tankini and an oversized shirt. Once again, I made it out of the pack house and into the forest with no one even noticing. I don't know whether it was good or bad, but it meant I didn't have to talk to anyone. So bonus. Finally, rounding the corner of the waterfall, I scanned my surroundings. The trees and clouds hid most of the sun, which left a cool, gentle breeze to run across my skin. I knew the water was warm, thanks to its magical abilities, so wasted no time in leaving my things in the side and scaling the waterfall rock formation. It was a little faster today, so I had to be extra careful as I made my way to the edge, deciding on a smooth dive to avoid the quickening of the stream. I broke through the surface with ease, swimming down to the bottom. I ran my hand along the sandy bed, small rocks floating along beside me. Coming up for air, I exhaled loudly, pushing my hair behind my ear. I spent quite a while just swimming before going to stand off to the side. The breeze had picked up, pushing my hair across my face and causing goosebumps to rise on my skin. I frowned, rubbing my arms in comfort. I had been out here long enough, my body tiring from the effort. One thing I loved about this lake is that it didn't turn your hands and feet into creepy wrinkly sausages thanks to its magic. I climbed the waterfall one last time before going back to the pack house. Scaling the side, my feet slipped a few times. The side of the rock formation had got wet from how harsh the water was flowing. Once at the top, I frowned down at the speed of the stream. Something about its harshness reminded me of someone hurrying. It was rushing to get to the edge, and it caused the goosebumps to never leave my skin as a strange sensation came over to me. Carefully walking to the edge, I adjusted my step to walk around the stream's edges. The main part of the current I usually dived off was way too fast. It almost made me slip the moment I placed my foot in it, curling my toes around the edge. I eyed the lake down below. The water was churning from the fall. Disturbed by the strange weather change, I took a few steps back to prepare my launch, stepping carefully as I ran to the edge. Once my feet left the rocks, I was flying, my hair whipping past me as the tall height rushed by me within seconds. The launch had meant I reached the bottom of sooner than before, and the undercurrent pushed me further into the middle of the lake. I ran my hand along the lake bed again, stopping when something caught my attention. It was a small crystal, like rock unearthed by the current of the lake. I was running out of breath, so keeping hold of the rock, I swam to the surface. Gasping for air, I pushed my hair down the back of my head and rose the rock above the water's surface. It was beyond pretty, a white silver in color. Its foggy surface was smooth all around. I was sure with some polishing it would be clear. I was too busy staring at the rock in amazement to pay attention to my surroundings. A gentle rumbling that caused my hair to stand on end, followed by a loud clearing of a throat. A sudden coolness rushed over my skin, and with my heart racing in my chest, I spun around to see who the intruder was. It was 3 men, all large and equally intimidating as they stared at me. One of the left was shorter in stature, a wider waist than the others. He had a rough stubble and brown hair, his hands securely behind his back. The one on the right was standing similarly, only he was a head taller with sandy blonde hair and a sharp bird-like nose. Both of them were watching me with curious eyes, but otherwise remained emotionless. It was the man in the center, equal in height to his blonde counterpart, that of my stomach churning with discomfort. He was eyeing me with a broad grin, his hand to his jaw as he licked the front of his canine teeth. Dark, black hair with dark eyes gazed at me in a way that had my skin crawl. I sunk further down in the water, hiding my body as these 3 strange men approached the shoreline. 39. The men walked closer, I sank myself in the lake further until just my head was visible. The water lapped at my chin and I wrapped my arms around myself to try to hide whatever was on show. I didn't like the way he was eyeing me. It made my skin crawl. Were they rogues? Were these the wolves that they had warned me about? They didn't seem crazy. What are you doing out here? The middleman wondered. I swallowed, my eyes darting between them as they stopped at the edge of the lake, mere meters away from me. I was sure they could reach me in a split second. Their shifter ability of speed way greater than mine. His nose twitched as the wind blew my hair into my face, a sly smirk lifting his features. For the first time in a while, I felt fear creep up my spine. The way this man's eyes flashed and how his sharpened teeth glinted did not settle right with me. What are you doing out here? Little human, he asked again. I stayed silent, and he cocked his head, his eyes scanning beneath the water. I pushed my body back further, my feet slipping from the surface of the lake as I grew deeper. What's wrong? Can't speak, he teased, a loud laugh escaping his throat that caused me to jump. His two friends snickered as he tapped them on the chest with the back of his hands. I licked my lips, my throat now dry with fear as the urge to run him through my body. His eyes followed the movement of my tongue, quirking with interest. He suddenly lowered himself until he was crouching, his long black coat trailing along the floor, and his hand gently dipped into the surface of the lake, holding my gaze, a small purr built in his throat. What are you doing out here? All alone. She's not alone. I jumped in surprise, my head spinning to the side as Asra rounded the rock formation of the lake. He walked quickly, smoothly, jumping over a large rock until he stood about 2 meters before the three men. Asra was shirtless, clad in just some shorts and barefoot. He stood at the lake's edge, a towel in his hands and angling his back so it was blocking me. The man rose to his feet, sneering at Asra with what I assumed was indifference. Alpha, so glad to see you again. He bowed his head, hands clapping in front of him. Asra grumbled. Alpha Blake, we directly instructed you where to enter my territory and what trail to walk. My shoulders straight and the visiting Alpha's name had come as a surprise. I was glad they were not rogues, but it did not stray from the fact he was not to be trusted. Blake chuckled, shrugging his shoulders. When I smell something delectably feminine and ovulating, I cannot help but seek it out. Fertility always smells divine. A cold wash of dread ran down my spine, along with the sudden urge to vomit from disgust. Fertile. Delectable? What even was this man? No, I didn't want to know. I really wanted to get out of here. Asra didn't like it, his head turning to meet my eyes as he held out the towel. Come here. I hesitated, glancing between him and the visiting man. My gaze settled back on Asra, my fear clear on my face. His eyes were hard, dark blue, swirling against the hard contours of his face. 𝐿𝐤, come here, he repeated. I swallowed, deciding he was the lesser of two evils, and nodded gently. I moved closer to him, quickly inching out of the water and running to his side. I was aware of the multiple eyes on my body, and Asra was quick to grab me by the arm and push me behind him. My hands fell to the hard skin of his shoulders as I hid behind him. He passed me the towel, and I hastily wrapped it around my shoulders as a shudder ran along my body. His back was tense, his hands clenched at his side as I pressed my body against his skin. Pretty name, Blake murmured, and Asra growled again. You do not seem as damp as the little human. Alpha, not fancy the swim. I clenched my jaw at the dawning tease, but Asra seemed to ignore him. I shall have my men escort you to where you shall be residing, Asra stated. I kept my eyes firmly on Asra's back, tracing the tattoos on his shoulders with my eyes. Blake sighed heavily, his feet crunching as he took a step closer. My nails dug into his skin slightly at the other alpha's movement, and Asra's hand came behind him to wrap around my waist. Peculiar behavior, Blake stated. Asra growled, halting the man in his tracks. Footsteps grew closer from behind me, and I turned my head to catch sight of the more men. Everett, Caleb, and 𝐾𝐿 I didn't know were running into the clearing. All three of them had hard glares, coming to a stop and surrounding their alpha. Caleb stood closest to me but to the side, his arm brushing against my bare shoulder. He glanced down at me, his lips pulled down in a grimace as he briefly scanned my face. I shivered and looked away, choosing to stare in front of me again. If you will, please join my men and they shall escort you to where you will stay tonight. Asra's voice was clear. Okay. We shall go in peace. Blake sighed loudly. I never knew following an instinct was such a crime. I built up the courage to peek around Asra as he said that, and Blake caught my gaze straight away. He smirked, his eyes were wide with amusement when he caught me peeping. I gave you strict instructions to a meeting point that you did not follow. Asra growled, his fingers flexing on my ribs as he pushed me back behind him. I frowned, wondering how he knew I was peeping so easily. I apologize, Blake chimed, attempting to sound sincere. No one acknowledged his apology, and the crunching of dirt filled the air as Blake and his men moved. Asra kept me hidden from view, turning us as they walked by. Caleb left our side, flanking the rear of the men as Everett and the other male had the sides. I watched from behind Asra, my feet back in the water as the six of them met with another two males hiding in the trees near the waterfall. Nobody turned back, but I saw Blake's head turn ever so slightly to glance over his shoulder. Everett growled at him, causing the alpha to laugh and faux jog forwards. Once they were out of sight and their footsteps disappeared, I sighed loudly, the nerves clutching my throat slowly dissipating. Asra returned, his large movement catching me off guard as I stumbled back a step into the water. His eyes were flaming with annoyance, his canines flashing as he sneered at me. What are you doing out here alone? He growled. My non-existent hackles raised. I pulled the towel around my body tighter. Ugh. You should be. He snapped. He took another step towards me until his bare feet were in the lake as well. I felt it instantly, that familiar warmth emitting from the lake. He hesitated, dropping his glare to direct it at the water instead. I have been coming out here for a few days to swim. I huffed. I didn't think it was a problem. It is. He grunted. You can't come out here. Why? Because I'm a girl. I snapped. No. Because I'm human. No, then what? I'm not defenseless, and I showed that pretty well when fighting 𝐿𝐳. I threw my arms in the air, causing the towel to fall into the water since I held so tightly to the rock instead. I groaned, my head falling backward. Eyes closed as I cursed the sky above me. With only one towel on me, I would have to walk back to the pack. Wet and soggy. Brilliant. 𝐿𝐳. 10 out of 10 on dumb things to do today. I grabbed the towel and threw it dramatically behind the annoying alpha. Then what? I repeated. I don't want you to come here when there are threats. He slowly explained. I quirked an eyebrow, crossing my arms in front of me. His eyes flashed down to my chest, and I grunted before lowering them so I wasn't scrunching up my assets. Threats? Like Blake? I wondered. He growled, blue eyes darting away from my semi-naked form. Don't say his name. If he is such a threat, why not go to his land? To be surrounded by wolves I don't trust. He scoffed. Better than have him come here and get 𝐿𝐳 out of your land and in inner workings. I pointed out. He paused, blinking slowly as he thought about what I said. His tension lessened the longer we stayed quiet, until eventually he grunted and took a step forward. The warming hug against my calves from the water increased, and it caused both of us to inhale. "Do you feel that as well?" I whispered. Ezra sighed, his eyes closing as he slowed his breathing, taking a large 𝐊𝐢𝐬𝐩 of air before he met my gaze. His eyes were softer, less harsh, as he searched my face and neck. "Did he touch you?" he asked quietly. "No," I muttered, shaking my head. I stayed in the water. He didn't enter. 𝐊𝐢𝐧𝐰𝐻𝐬. His jaw briefly tensed. "Good." It was silent after I nodded, awkwardly looking down at the lake as it lapped at my ankles. The waterfall behind me had gone eerily quiet, and I turned over my shoulder to find it had slowed back to its usual trickle. Narrowing my eyes at it, I sent a silent, confused curse to Mother Nature. "You are scared," Ezra commented, looking back at him. I shrugged. My defense is up. "You cannot trust him." "I know." Silence again, and I kept his gaze. He looked down at my body, his eyes narrowing as he observed my skin. I didn't shift away, merely kept my eye on him. "Come, it's getting to dinner time," Asra murmured, gesturing with his arm. I eagerly stepped closer, just as a cool breeze brushed my damp hair in front of my shoulders. Ezra already turned around but must have caught a scent because he growled lowly. I made no comment, trudging out of the water and towards my dry shirt. "I'm just going to get dressed," I muttered softly, stopping by my clothes. He nodded, stopping a few feet behind me with his arms crossed. His eyes scanned the surrounding trees and hedgerows, and I took my chance to take off the soggy bikini. The shirt was big enough, and I did not want to get it drenched from the swimsuit material. Goosensed bumps rose on my skin, the hair on my body standing on end with awareness. The breeze brushed by me as I pulled the large shirt over my head. A satisfied hum as the fabric protected me from the cool wind. Turning around, I held my wet bikini in hand, and it didn't surprise me to find Asra watching me. He'd most likely watched me get dressed too. There wasn't a lot to look at, so it didn't bother me he had seen me nude. I was used to it. Remember, the tightening of his fists and the darkness of his eyes told me otherwise as I pulled on my shoes. "What is it? Do you get naked in front of everyone you know?" he grunted. I couldn't help but let out a small laugh, shaking my head as we fell into tandem steps. "It does not bother you?" he wondered. I smiled awkwardly. "I learned to live with it." "You are not a wolf," he pointed out. "You do not need to be naked. You need warmth." Shrugging slightly, I remained silent, and he dropped the subject. We walked for the next 10 minutes in silence. My heavier breaths were the only sounds heard as we navigated the rough terrain. I stumbled a few times, and it caused him to hesitate before we continued at my dismissal. I took my time to observe him, curious by his attitude. This man was harder to figure out than a puzzle book. Just when I think I have solved one, the next seemed to be even harder. Ezra moved swiftly through the forest, his colossal form surprisingly agile. I couldn't help but admire the way his body moved. The muscles and smooth skin of his lower back were particularly edible. Incredible. I cursed quietly as we broke the tree line, which caused him to quirk an eyebrow at me. "Nothing." I shook my head. He hummed, "Want me to escort you to your room?" I shook my head, laughing slightly. "I am perfectly capable of walking to an elevator." He smirked. "The way your heart races when you are inside, it does not seem very enjoyable." How did he know my heart raced? Was he creepily listening to me? Weirdo. Asra must have seen the peculiar expression on my face because he cleared his throat, catching my full attention once again. "You space out a lot," he commented. "I know," I sighed, dropping my head in the clouds. "Sorry. It's cute." The comment caught me off guard, so much so that I came to a complete stop and stared at the back of his head in surprise. I have never been called cute for my bad habits. Darius clarified that 𝐷𝐴𝐺𝐸 was rude and unattractive, a terrible flaw of mine. But Asra found it cute. A warmth settled in my chest and I couldn't help but smile shyly. "So, you think I'm cute?" I attempted to lighten the situation. He rolled his eyes, jerking his head to get me moving. "It's endearing how your mind wanders so much." "You think so?" I pouted. "You don't?" he asked, cocking his head. I was told it was quite the opposite. "Really? By whom?" he wondered. "Everyone," I admitted, staring at my feet. I had an image to uphold that meant my flaws were not appreciated. We came to a stop by the front door, and he turned to me, glancing up at him. I pushed the hair from my eyes to find his face marred with a scowl. I suddenly regretted not having a filter in my brain right now, an awkwardness settling over me as I flushed with embarrassment. "Being observant and imaginative is not a flaw." He shook his head. I stayed silent, unable to meet his eyes. He sighed softly, a hand coming to wrap around my shoulder and push me towards the door. He held it open with his other hand, allowing me to enter before him. "Thank you," I murmured, turning to face him once inside. "No problem." He smiled softly. "Not just this. Thank you for the whole creepy, curvy, alpha thing," he grumbled, his hand pushing a strand of my hair away from my face. It caused the goosebumps to return, a flush spreading across my cheeks. "If he bothers you again, do not hesitate to shout me. I will hear you, no matter where you are." Staring into each other's eyes, the tension rose with his admittance. My heart raced with a strange sense of comfort before he nodded at me and walked away. Exhaling loudly, I ran my hand through my hair before walking towards the death trap, the ghost of his fingers against my skin. Once inside, I sank against the wall to try to calm my racing heart. What is this man doing to me? Warning, sexual content. This is an 18 book, guys. PLS, remember that. As soon as I reached my room, I headed straight for the bathroom to clear my head. Turning the shower on, I was quick to take off the damp shirt and get under the current. Closing my eyes to wash the ghost touches of Blake's eyes, I submerged my face under. Despite all of that, all I could think about was the way Asra protected me, running the soap over my body. I thought of how his hands held me by the waist, how he pulled me into his back to hide me from the intruding males, the ghost of his hand as it pushed the hair behind my ear. I shuddered, running my hand between my thighs and causing a bolt of electricity to jolt through me. Those hands, caressing me softly, never firm unless he was keeping me out of harm's way. The way the water reacted to his presence, how his body was always warm. He made me feel calm when he was gentle, and I could look him in the eye without breaking eye contact. Despite his large and imposing size and status, he brought me a sense of calm. His touch had my body lighting up in ways that Darius never did, and I craved him even more for that. My lips parted as I ran my hand along the length of my body, enjoying the way my skin pebbled and nipples rose to attention. Unable to resist the temptation while strampant thoughts still lingered in my mind, my hand lowered to touch myself. I exhaled shakily, the water an aphrodisiac as it ran down my breasts and stomach. I hummed softly as I brought myself my own pleasure, my back arching as my head pressed into the wall. It had been a while since I had touched myself. too afraid back home of what may happen if Darius ever caught me. I couldn't help. I couldn't stand Asra's embrace. His presence was too overwhelming. His blue eyes were captivating, but I refused to be a pawn in his game. But damn, even his body, sculptured in all the right places, strong defined jaw and shoulders, bulging biceps and well-defined back muscles. I remembered the way my fingers dug into his shoulders, the way his tattoos hugged every contour of his physique, his tempting V-line leading to that glorious, more than enough member I glimpsed at the lake last time. I whimpered, my hand sliding more furiously against my clit. I moaned, angling my body so the water streamed directly against the palm of my hand. My breaths were quick, the cool tile the only thing keeping me standing. I was too busy in my small section of heaven to even care about anything else. So safe to say, when I finally opened my eyes and found dark blue ones blinking back at me, it took me a moment to realize it wasn't in my head. I jumped, my hands flying to cover myself as I screamed in horror at Asra's being. He was frowning, leaning against my vanity with his arms behind his back. His hair was more disheveled than when I last saw him. I wondered how I didn't even hear him. Glancing at my door, I blinked through the pouring of the shower. How did you get in here? His eyebrows furrowed at the sound of my screech. You didn't lock your door. My lips parted, unable to form words. Get out. Oh no. Please, don't stop on my behalf. He grinned, his pupils blown. It was just getting to the good part. I cursed, turning around to face the wall and hide my shame. It only resounded in a soft grumble from Asra, but I figured giving him my ass was better than him gawking at my aching front. Why are you even in here? I muttered, embarrassment flushing my cheeks. You are my mate, so. I spat, shooting him a glare over my shoulder. I am more connected to you than you realize. He chimed, sounding rather pleased with himself, and I grunted, rinsing the remaining soap from my hair from earlier. When it feels like my mate is receiving intimate pleasure, I had to make sure that nobody was taking what was mine. He growled, little to my surprise. It was more entertaining than that. Wanting to give him a piece of my mind, I spun around to glare at him, as there as the day I was born. Water pounding down my skin, and Asra wasted no time in tracing his eyes across my body. Are you going to continue? Or do you need some help? He cocked his head. I glowered at him, my hands moving to my hips to not look so intimidated. He was messing with me. The cocky smirk on his face was testing me, egging me on to try it. My adrenaline was pumping, eager to prove this man wrong. Pushing the wet hair from my face, I decided my fate. With confidence boiling beneath my skin, I slowly dragged my hands down my body. The water cascaded just right, my hands grabbing at my breasts before trailing down to finish my own business. Asra's eyes followed my movement, blazing, when my fingers continued their task. He shifted his weight, and I ran my eyes along his freshly clothed body, only to be surprised when I found the growing tent in his trousers. It only fueled me more, as his eyes stayed locked on my body. A burning desire built in mine. His scent invaded the fog-filled air, filling my lungs with every breath. It was intoxicating, a fruit that I couldn't get enough of. A small moan of pleasure left my lips as my stomach tightened, and Asra growled in response. It only seemed to edge me on further, the deep baritones of his groans vibrating my senses. He leveled his gaze with mine, and I darted my eyes to his crotch, licking my lips. He pampered himself, shifting the bulge in his pants. I whimpered, arching my back as my hand vigorously chased my high. Asra, seemingly unable to hide his desires anymore, quickly pulled down the waistband of his trousers and pants and pulled himself out. I'm on the length of him, licking my lips as the first drop of pre-cum escaped the tip. He growled, his hand urgently pumping himself. His eyes closed, his lungs filling with my scent as I neared my finish. The size of him fascinated me, his width almost the same as his fist, his length reaching far past his belly button. I had never seen a cock so large, and it not only terrified me, but set a burning enthrallment of what through my body. My eyes closed, unable to hold the direct contact as I brought myself, finally, to my climax. My thighs shook, my breath heavy as I panted against the wall. Finally sated, my hand slumped against my stomach, my shoulders easing against the wall. Asra's low grumble grew closer, and the shower turned off. My eyes flew open, surprised to find him directly in front of me. I straightened my spine as his body towered over me. His blue eyes stared into me, his nostrils flaring as he licked his lips. I arched into him, my hands grabbing at his biceps as he continued to pump himself. I was burning, consumed by the lust and power of his body. It saturated my pores, blurred my mind until it was nothing but a haze. His low grumble sent my body into a tremor that had me gasping in his scent. "Look at me," he whispered lowly. My eyes rose from his chest to find his face up close to me. His lips brushed my nose, mine caressing his chin with every heavy breath. He groaned, his spare hand moving to hold his weight behind my head as he leaned over me. I blinked slowly, licking my lips to get more of his delightful smell and warmth into my body. He suddenly cursed, his hand slowing as jets of warmth streamed down my stomach. His growl turned into a low moan of pleasure as he found his climax, coating my stomach in his release. His hand slowed its movements, stuttering to a stop when his forehead rested upon mine. I blinked in an attempt to clear the fog, our heavy breaths mixing with each other. Slowly, he pulled away, pushing his weight from the wall and allowing the light and fresh air to blossom over my body. The stickiness of his release still coated my skin. I stood upright, my legs shaky and heavy. It was quiet, Asra watching me with a content expression. He leaned closer, nostrils flaring once before a growl of what felt like approval built in his chest. Moving out of the shower, he turned the taps back on the water, jolting me back to reality. With a soft smile, he lazily moved to wash his hands and softening member with soap before drying himself on my bath towel. I copied him, cleaning my skin before climbing out and wrapping a towel around both my body and hair. He waited for me by the sink, his arms crossed patiently. "We need to talk," I murmured once I was dry and moisturized. He nodded mutely, following me out of the bathroom. The atmosphere was intense, rather relaxed, as though the invisible string between us was content for a while. My skin warmed gently when he sat beside me on the bed. "What do you want to talk about?" he wondered. I raised an eyebrow at him, but he trained his eyes on the tower of a cotton towel on my head. I smirked, glancing down at my hands. "What just happened?" I whispered. He chuckled, falling back onto his elbows. I followed his movement with my gaze, trailing my eyes along his smart shirt. I had only just noticed that he was wearing a suit, minus the tie and jacket. Black trousers and boots with a white suit shirt halfway buttoned. Did I have to dress up for dinner too? I think it is rather self-explanatory, he murmured. I glared at him, causing his lips to spread into a grin again, shaking my head. I gestured between the two of us. "I thought you wanted nothing to do with me. Now you are intruding on my private time." His eyes dropped into a glower, his upper lip twitching into a frown. "I could sense you were acting sexual, and I was furious, thinking someone else was." I couldn't help but smirk at his choice of words. Furious. I thought you wanted nothing to do with me, he growled low, mulling over his next words. I don't think I can. Can, I wondered. Can what? Ignore you, he admitted. I blinked, turning to stare down at him with a shocked expression. What? You intrigue me. You draw me in without even realizing. He pulled himself upright to sit beside me, glaring holes into my knees. It makes the beast part of me so eager to. I swallowed past the lump in my throat to sink my teeth into you. I flinched with surprise, an icy shiver of dread running down my spine. I shifted away from him. The fear of being torn into pieces outweighed the lusty thoughts. Because you are my mate, I asked after a moment's pause. He hesitated, avoiding eye contact before nodding once. Yeah? Silence once again consumed us before I built up the courage to say the words I needed to say. He clouded my thoughts, held my desire captive. I had to put a boundary in place. This cannot happen again, I commented. His growl was loud, reverberating around the room. He pushed up from the bed, stomping loudly until he was a few inches away, running a hand down his face. His nostrils flared before he huffed loudly. You are right, he snapped, eyes blazing as they stared at me. It was as though he was taking in a last look. And then he shook his head and stormed out of my room like a temperamental child.